Hey guys, welcome back. Today's a little bit different from my usual video. I told you guys a while back that I ended up ordering a book, my favorite book that I've ever read. It was the Transall Saga by Gary Paulsen here, that you guys got right here. And I read it in high school, yeah. And I loved it. I just loved everything about it. And Gary Paulsen became my favorite author after that. Because before that, I had read his Hatchet book, or well, I read the Hatchet book, and then I saw this book, and my librarian showed me all of the Hatchet, not the Hatchet books, sorry, the Gary Paulsen books that he had, and I read through I think every single one that we had in the library, but this was my favorite. I might end up doing a video on some of his other books, maybe. I'll have to order some because I don't own them. But anyways, the Transall Saga by Gary Paulsen. Now, here's a summary of the book, okay? So, 13-year-old Mark Harrison is hiking through the Magruder missile range when he encounters a strange blue light. While examining the light, a snake attacks him, causing Mark to fall in. When he opens his eyes, he was in a strange world with red grass. What will become of Mark in this new world? Yeah, that's gonna be like a real like bare bones summary. Just Mark, he's a real outdoorsy kid. He likes going around and hiking and doing all this other stuff. And one of the days he's hiking through, and I think he was like getting ready to go to sleep or something. He was getting ready for setting up camp. But it'd probably be best to read it from the book in this part, okay? So I'll probably be doing that a few times in here because it's just really well written, I feel like. So he's sitting there, and then all of a sudden, it says a flaming ball of fire shot over the edge of the canyon wall, and a fiery thing the size of a grapefruit glowed bright orange around its blue edges. And he goes up to it with like a flashlight, and he takes some pictures along the way, and as he gets up to it, he's looking, and inside like the blue light that it's emanating, there's like a tube of light, and there's like surging colors of reds and blues and yellows, like watching a light show, he says. And while he's looking at it, a snake tries to strike at him, and he falls in. He falls off the boulder into the light. And I mean, if you're thinking about reading the book, I would just like, this would be just a good like, oh, this is a good explanation of kind of the story and so how it starts. I would now move on to my spoiler warning PowerPoint slide here. Everything from now on is going to be spoilers. I mean, everything like that was just like an easy summary. With knowing that, it's not going to spoil anything. But everything from now on, if you are thinking about reading this book, do not finish this video. Maybe read the book and then come back to this if you want to, and you can hear my stuff. Or if you really don't care about like major plot points being ruined, and you're like, I care about the journey and not the points, then I guess you can listen to this. It's up to you. But I don't want to ruin the book for someone else, because it was just amazing whenever I read it my first time. So I recommend reading the book before you continue. So now I'm going to move on to characters. So the first character we have is Mark. He's our main character. He's 13-year-old and loves the outdoors. Second character we meet in the story is going to be Willie. He is like a monkey bear thing that he finds in the forest when he first comes to a new world. Lita is the first person that Mark meets in this new world, okay? She's a little different than regular humans or anything, because she's got webbed feet, and she becomes Mark's friend. Easy as that. There's... I think I spelled that wrong. I think it's Megan with the two... Yes, I did. Anyways, Megan, tough and caring, and she does grow to like Mark later on in the story. And in the beginning, she was actually Mark was actually her slave. So yeah, Barrow, Megan's little brother, wonderful little kid. Dagon is Megan's dad and leader of the Tisuk. Tisuk? And also Barrow's father. Sarbo, uh, he kind of teaches Mark how to be a warrior. I mean, like, in the very beginning, he's not really friendly with Mark, but slowly begins to warm up to him. Then, one of my favorite characters is Murkon. He is the ruler of Transall. Yeah. Transall, it's... The book is called the Transall Saga, and the world, they call the world Transall. And Murkon's a ruler of this. He's kind of the overlord or whatever. He is actually one of the major, like, spoiler warning, this is like one of the major spoilers. He is actually from Mark's world. He was transported here through the blue light, just like Mark. And he was a prisoner before escaping and ending up here. Then we have Mordo here, which does not become a major plot point till the very end of the story, where he actually hunts Mark. But it's Murkon's son. Now, I'm going to break the story up into sections, and I'm not going to give huge descriptions of the thing. I'm just going to kind of go major plot points, kind of explain some stuff that happens in there. But the major sections I broke the story kind of down into is the forest, where Mark starts out his journey, where he meets Willie and stuff. And then there's the village, where it's the village of Lita's people, the Arrow people. Then the town with the Tisuk and Megan and Barrow and all them. Then the last one is kind of like a hard section to I wanted 4 sections. It seemed nice. But the last section kind of encompasses a lot of stuff, but I called it the hunt. So let's just go on from there. We'll start out with the forest. So when Mark first gets here into the world, he meets some monkey-like creatures, and that's one of them ends up being Willie, and they become friends. Because I don't know for sure why, but it seems like Willie might be a little bit of an outcast, and I don't know. So the first food source he kind of eats there is, I think they called them like tree nuts or something like that, but it's basically like a coconut, where you kind of break it open. It's got a hard shell, and you can carve out like the coconut, the white of the coconut, and there's also a liquid, kind of like a water or coconut juice water. He also eats some like bugs and like whatever else he can get. He ends up building a treehouse, climbing from vines and doing all this Tarzan like crap, and he ends up falling and stuff like that. And I mean, he kind of gets to the point where he's doing better. And one of the big achievements he gets in this section is, throughout the story, he's kind of heard something howling inside the woods. And he's always kind of stayed away from that area because it's kind of scary. And one day he's out scouting and stuff, and he comes across the howling thing. And it's kind of described as a dog or a wolf or something, like a big animal. And it is like clawing at a tree, like at the lower branches. And this is where Mark first meets Lita. She is in the tree, and the howling thing is trying to get after her. Mark, surprisingly, against all odds, ends up killing the howling thing. I think he ends up, like, the howling thing ends up running at him, and he ends up, like, impaling it on some weapon, like a stick or something. I think his spear. And he kills it, and I mean, Lita runs off because she's scared. And they think takes like the claws of the howling thing or the teeth or something and makes like a necklace out of it. And he's really happy about finally killing something like this in the story. It's a big thing. But he ends up following Lita because I think there's like a blood trail or something, or he ends up following footprints, something along those lines. And he kind of gets a direction of where she goes. So he goes back, kind of says bye to Willie, says like, "Oh, I'm gonna go on a long trip," and he heads out to find Lita and the Arrow people. So this is where we move on to the next section of the story that I would say is the village. The village is the Arrow people. It's Lita's people. And these are the first people that he meet in the New World, other than Lita. Like, Lita's the first person. This is the first group of people. And he doesn't really understand them much. He still doesn't understand their language at all. But he kind of works his way to... He does, like, dances and kind of uses his hands to emulate stuff. And ends up telling stories about killing, like, the Howling Thing. And tries to get around what he's trying to get to, like, say to them. But this section doesn't last very long. Because the village gets attacked by the Tusuk. And the villagers that survive get enslaved and are brought to our next section, which is the town. Now, during the village section, the Arrow people also do go to war with other villages, so it's not like they're victims or anything. They still kill people. And it's one of those things that Mark about leaves because he's like, they're just the same as anyone else. Like, he thought these were good people. But anyways, the Tusuk come, burn down the village, kill people, and enslave the rest. And they get brought on a long, kind of a long journey to the Tusuk's village, which is the town section I was talking about. The town is the Tusuk, and Mark is kept as a slave there, and later on he does end up winning his freedom, not like all the other people. Like, even Lita is still a slave through most of the story. But Mark is Dagon's slave, or I guess Megan's slave in turn, since it's daughter, father. And Megan actually does take good care of him. And kind of gives him a little bit of stuff to do, is nice to him. And he does see Lita still, but he doesn't really get to talk to her very much. Now, Mark ends up gaining his freedom through saving the town from an incoming attack. And I think it was like cannibal people? I think that's what it was. It's been a little while since I've read it, but I still remember the story pretty good from when I read it my first time. So he saves the town and about almost dies when doing it. Megan actually comes out and finds him, and he's kind of beat up and stuff like that, and brings him back to town. And since he saved the town, won his freedom and stuff like that, he ends up getting like a house to live in and like all this other stuff. It's pretty nice. There's a big like festival that happens, and everyone's not like more friendly to him, and he actually ends up getting a gift from Barrow, Megan's brother. And this is the big turning point of the story. It's where we actually get an idea of where he is at. And what Mark gets from Barrow is a Coca-Cola bottle. And at first I sat there, I'm like, oh, just a single Coca-Cola bottle? That could have possibly come through the portal. Like, what else has come through there? But while he's looking through the village, he asks them, he's like, is there anything else like this kind of thing? And I think one of the other things he finds is like a car part that says General Motors on it. And he keeps finding these other things that have different like brand names and companies' names on them. And we get the idea that this world is just the future. It isn't any other world. It's just the future that Mark has been teleported to, and something has happened to the humans and everything else to bring them back to kind of the Dark Ages. And this was like a big mind blow for me at the time. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And this is where Mark first meets Murkon. It is at the festival, and Murkon kind of questions him, and Mark tells him about the blue light and everything that's happened, how he's from a different world. And Murkon at the time, Mark does not know Murkon's from his world. So Murkon's just kind of like, oh, that's interesting story, you know, like, I've actually heard of this, like, and he says that, oh, there's some sage in another town that knows about the blue light that might be able to help you. Well, Mark goes on a trip with Sabro, the guy that taught him how to be a warrior, and goes to the village or to see the sage. Well, Murkon has sent people to kill Mark because he does not want Mark to tell anyone about his old world, and basically the Murkon, since he's from Mark's world, he knows a ton of stuff that these people do not know, and he sees them as kind of ants and just stupid, and he wants to control them. So Mark teaching them other stuff is not helping his plan. So Mark ends up going, after he learns that the Murkon sent people to kill him, he goes on a journey with Sabro. Well, no, I don't think Sabro came with him, actually. No. He goes on a journey to this last part I'm going to count, which is a huge, huge section, which is the hunt. So Mark journeys to Murkon's home, and he meets some people along the way that are kind of like rebels against Murkon. And they get into Murkon's home through a plan of like, oh, we'll act like we're turning you in kind of thing. And they turn Mark in, and the Murkon is talking to Mark and explaining all this stuff. This is where we learned that the Murkon was a prisoner, and he was transported to the world from when he ran away. And the Murkon, since he's been here for years and years and years, he's kind of pieced together things that Mark has just learned. And Murkon already knows that this is the future. From what Murkon has pieced together is that there was a strain of the Ebola virus that killed tons and tons of people, like well over half the population of the whole world. And it kept the population down for so long that everything just kind of ended. Like, civilization stopped, kind of. Like, there weren't any big groups of people anymore. There were smaller towns and stuff like that. And he also said that the reason why the trees and stuff are red could possibly be chemical changes. He also said that some, like, nuclear missiles might have been launched by terrorists and stuff. He doesn't know exactly what happened, but he's kind of made some guesses. While Mark is there in the Murkon's home, they do end up getting into a fight because the Murkon tries to just take him out there. And Mark actually slices the Murkon through the stomach, which is a killing blow over time. So the Murkon does not die at that moment. He dies later after Mark gets out of there. So after Mark leaves, he heads back to Sook Town, where he kind of starts a life. He's like, okay, this is where I'm going to live. I'm going to make, like, I don't know how to get back to my own time. Doesn't know where to find the blue light or anything like that. So he kind of just almost gives up on his idea of going home. So he has his house. I think he was thinking about farming and stuff like that. And he also, this whole time, like, he's been kind of looking at Megan. And Megan has also been, in turn, looking at him. And they kind of start a relationship kind of thing. And they were thinking about getting married. And this, at the point whenever I was in high school and stuff, I said, I'm like, oh, that's so sweet and everything. And this is where kind of the happiness ends. Because uh, they get wind. The people that helped Mark get into the Mercon's home, the rebels, they find Mark back at the Chisuk village, and they're like, "We are being hunted down by Mordo, the Mercon's son, because the Mercon is basically either dead or is dying, and Mordo has come to get revenge. And he's brought kind of an army with him to fight Mark, to kill him. And Mark ends up leaving the village to protect them, to make sure they don't get attacked. And this is like my favorite part of the story right here, okay? The hunt brings Mordo through like all these places that Mark has already been, and ends in the forest where Mark first started his journey. So everything went full circle. And Mark sets up traps, and he ends up taking down like tons of Mordo men all the way to the forest, and then does guerrilla warfare stuff to take out the rest of Mordo's men. And he does end up actually killing Mordo himself inside the forest. And Mark thinks that everything is fine now. He's taken out Mordo, he's taken out most of the army, the rest of them have started running away. And Mark kind of relaxes. Until some of the advance party that first went to the forest that they thought were dead comes around and attacks him when he's not looking. And here's the part that is like the whole like epitome of why I got so mad at the story when I was younger. So Mark runs into the clearing where he first got teleported to the world, and he hides behind a boulder to protect himself from these people. I think they have like bows and arrows or crossbows or whatever. I think it's crossbows. And he had been shot in the arm, so he could not pull back his crossbow. He couldn't shoot at them. So whenever Mordo's men come up to the boulder, he gets on top of the boulder and is getting ready to attack them when lightning strikes. Lightning strikes the boulder as he's standing on it. And I'll read to you what the last bits of this story is. And then we'll go to the epilogue, kind of describe what happens. But anyways, Mark couldn't shake them. His arm was numb, and he felt weak. He kept running and dodging right and left. Oh, sorry. A little bit farther. So he spotted a boulder to his left and sprinted toward it. He could just reach it for cover. And yeah, his arm was too weak to pull back the string to his crossbow. So he dragged himself on the boulder, and he pulled out his sword, preparing to leap down on them when lightning struck the boulder. So it sends balls of electricity shooting in all directions, and a tube of blue light envelops Mark, just like the one that brought him here. And then Mark's body brutally shook. He could feel himself falling. And that is the end of Mark's journey in Transall. Because the next time Mark wakes up, people are standing over him, and he raises to his feet and swinging his sword, and people start screaming and calling to him in a strange language, which the language ends up being his language from his world, like English. And he's like next to a little fountain, which I think is like a mall fountain, like you know how they have in malls, like the wishing fountain kind of thing. And people are just staring at him, and a small boy comes up to him and says, "Mister, do you need a doctor?" And I just, at the time, I could not laugh at that because I'm sitting here in just awe, but now I'm sitting here, I'm like, that's hilarious. And I think there's one here in the mall, he says. So yes, he's in a mall. And yeah, the boy had spoke to him in English. The blue light had brought him back to his world. And that's how the story ends. And like I was so mad at that time. I'm sitting here, I'm like, Mark was just starting to be happy in this world. He had taken out his antagonist. He was going to marry the girl of his dreams. He had friends and stuff like that in this world. He had done everything right. And then he ends back up in his own world, which he kind of wanted to go back to his world, but I think he'd kind of given up on hope and was alright with living there with Megan and starting a family. And I was so mad. I did a book report on this book, and I kept talking to my teacher. I'm like, I cannot tell you how mad I am with this ending. I ended up reading the book like 7 times in just like a couple weeks span. And she's like, okay, you can't give everything off. You want people to read the book. You don't want to ruin it for them. And I'm like, but they need to know. Oh, it's such a good book. It's such good. But there is an epilogue. Uh, the epilogue to the story. So Mark ends up becoming a doctor. And let me see. He starts working on curing or working against the Ebola strains that the Mercon thought caused this whole thing to happen. And he's trying to find a cure, possible vaccines to stop this. Yeah. And it says, here's a strange one. Last night, when he did the final test on the new Ebola inoculation, he looked at the ceiling and whispered, Megan, this is for you. Or something like that. I mean, what's a Megan? Weird. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, I'm so... Like, he's trying to stop all this from happening. And, like, it would cause, like, Megan to possibly never exist or something in the future. And he's doing this to kind of stop them from going through all the stuff that happened. He's trying to stop it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then after that, it's one of his like assistants or nurses or whatever that's also working there, research assistants, says, I think he needs a break from work. Some friends of mine are planning a hike in the desert this weekend through the Magruder Missile Range. Maybe I'll invite him to come along. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh. If he went, like, this would be the perfect thing to, like, bring him back to Transall. Like, knowing Mark, I don't know for sure if he'd go back or not. Because he's done this work to try to prevent the future that happens. So if he went back, he might not even see Megan. But he might see a world that is totally different from, like, he helped cause. And, like, they're like, oh, the doc, he's tame. He wouldn't like that. And it's like, he'll be fine. It's just a hike in the desert. What could happen? And I'm sitting here, I'm like, a lot could happen. A blue light could transport you to a different, to the future. And, oh, this was kind of my first introduction to isekai. And, like, I think this is the reason why I like isekai anime. And I've become an isekai trash connoisseur. It's such a good book. Such a good book. And I could not recommend this book enough. I wish that Gary Paulsen was still alive, because I would like to shake his hand and get an autograph on my Transall Saga book. And, like, possibly, if he had the time, talk to him about this and see what his thought process was behind this story. Because it's not one of his most well-known books. Hatchet is, in the Hatchet series. But this one is my all-time favorite book. It goes down in my heart. I've never forgot it since I've read it. And I sat there, I'm like, you know what? I can tell you guys about it. And I hope you guys, if you did not listen to all of this, if you're not maybe now listening to it, maybe you're thinking about buying the book now since I've went through all this. I don't care. Whatever, I'm just glad I can give this to you guys and bring out a great book that a lot of people probably have not read. So anyways, I forgot. I forgot. I have some favorite parts. Oh, I got so into just talking about this. Oh. So, my favorite parts, like I said, Mark fighting Mordo through the forest. I've already told you how awesome it was. Him using everything he's learned through this world and fighting it on his home field advantage inside the forest against Mordo. It just felt so good. When he learned the Mercon's true identity about being a prisoner from his world, and then what caused it, like the Ebola strain killing people and like nuclear war and stuff, all that stuff was like, oh my gosh. And the progression, because he starts out alone in the forest with a monkey, basically. Then he like sees a small group of people, the village life, and then he ends up in an actual town, and that's kind of like I don't want to say civilized, but like what you think a town would be. And it's just a great progression. And then at the very end, where it stopped, the story ends where it began, in the same clearing where he got teleported here. Just beautiful. Learning the future, the world was the future, okay? Like when he first saw that Coca-Cola bottle and the General Motors like vehicle part, that was where everything just clicked. And I loved it. Like everything before that, I was sitting there like, okay, this is good. But then right there was where, oh, it became my favorite book right at that point. My favorite characters, the Mercon. He is such a good antagonist. Oh, I wish they would have I wish the story would have been a little bit longer, like maybe 100 pages longer, because they could have fleshed out the Mercon so much more, and possibly Mordo, because we just get to see Mordo fighting at Mark through the forest and along the way to the forest. So like fleshing out them and maybe fleshing out the world a little bit more would be great. I would have loved to see a second book of this, because like seeing Mark go there when he's older, and possibly like it would be sad if everything he did not cause the world to change any, but then he could find Megan again, and he could find Lita, and he could find everyone he left in the world and see them again. That would be, it'd be sad that he couldn't change anything, but also happy. And Mark, he is a very good character. I love him. Love how he goes through the world and stuff like that. The Mercon's my favorite. I like antagonists better than the protagonists. So yeah, that is my whole thing. I could go on hours about talking about the Transall Saga. And if any of you want to talk about the Transall Saga or ask me questions or whatever, go into the comments or tweet to me on Twitter or something like that. I will talk to you on Discord if you give me your stuff. Because if you want to learn about the story, or you also like the story and are a Gary Paulsen fan, I will speak to you for hours on end. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys, okay? It has been a treat going through reading this book again. And I hope my PowerPoint skills are alright for you guys, because I was never good at PowerPoint when I was younger. I was always the white background PowerPoint person, not really doing any transitions or anything. And my PowerPoints never looked good, but I could always put a point on the thing and I could talk about it forever. Where I'm usually a very quiet person. Whenever I talk about something I am very passionate about, this is where my bread and butter is. So, like I said, thanks for watching, guys. I will try to do a couple more of these. I'll try to do more of these, because I do like it. The next book that Gary Paulsen's that I loved, other than Hatchet, because Hatchet is more of a well-known one. I like to go through the ones that are a little less known, is The Chronicles of White Fox. It was one of my next favorite ones, and I do not remember as much as I did the Transall Saga. So possibly that one will be a next one if I can order it and get it in. I also want to do some PowerPoints on like animals and stuff like that. Animals and plants. I want to do topic-based stuff, like sciencey stuff. Maybe some science literature. because I don't get to do as much of that stuff now that I'm not in school. So now, this is kind of my way of filling that gap in. Oh, okay, I better end it here because this is already getting long. But thank you guys. Please read the book and just like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff or whatever. It means a lot to me to see just like one subscriber or like a like. I can live off that for days, guys. And if you comment or whatever, even better. Even better. Okay, well, I better get going. So, bye, guys.